At Westbridge Military Training Academy, where excellence was the standard, an old janitor shuffled through the polished halls every morning. Dressed in a faded gray uniform, he was a shadow, quiet, invisible, and mostly ignored. His name tag was blank, but the creases on his face and the tired bend in his spine spoke of a life lived heavily. A faded ball cap with retired stitched above a patch sat on his head, unnoticed by most. Before the first cadet even woke up, he'd clocked in, pushing his broom with a steady rhythm. The cadets, fresh from polished suburbs and military families, strutted with arrogance. They were young, eager to command, their boots cleaner than their records. To them, the janitor was just a fixture, scrubbing their boot prints off the marble floor and emptying trash filled with their coffee cups. Some mocked him openly. They'd nudge each other as he passed, cracking jokes loud enough for him to hear. Sergeant Mop, one called him. Another asked if he'd gotten lost on the way to the VA hospital. Their laughter echoed, but the old man never flinched. He kept sweeping, his silence mistaken for shame. It wasn't shame, it was something deeper, something they couldn't grasp. The academy, steeped in tradition, had forgotten its roots. Cadets chased glory, but humility was left behind. No one asked his name or noticed his slight limp. No one wondered why he stared at the wall of honor, where portraits of great leaders hung. He was just the janitor until the day the truth walked in. The disrespect at Westbridge Military Academy grew like a storm brewing on the horizon. The old janitor, with his worn-out broom and silent dignity, became a target for the cadets' unchecked bravado. It wasn't all of them, some stayed silent, but enough joined in to make the halls feel hostile. One morning, the cafeteria buzzed with late breakfast chatter when a second-year cadet, Landon, stepped up his game. All swagger and southern charm, he deliberately knocked over his tray as the old man passed by. Eggs, toast, and orange juice splattered across the floor like a battlefield blunder. Oops. Landon grinned, his voice booming for all to hear. Looks like we got a mess, soldier. The word soldier dripped with mockery, sparking snickers across the room. The janitor didn't react. He glanced at the mess, nodded slowly, and began cleaning. Not a word, not a glance. But the room didn't let up. Emboldened by Landon's act, other cadets piled on. Crumpled napkins flew, coffee cups spilled, and one even tossed a banana peel like a cartoon prank. Through it all, the old man moved with deliberate care, as if the chaos was just a ripple in a much larger sea. They didn't know he'd faced worse, far worse. To them, he was background noise, a man with a broom in a world of stars and stripes. The academy's focus on excellence had blinded them to the human cost of their traditions. No one asked why his hands trembled slightly or why his eyes lingered on the wall of honor. They laughed, thinking him harmless, unaware that his silence held stories they couldn't fathom. The stage was set for a revelation. At Westbridge Military Training Academy, the old janitor's routine never wavered despite the cadets' mockery. Every morning, he arrived before dawn, his gray uniform blending into the shadows of the grand corridors. His broom moved with a rhythm born of years, sweeping away the evidence of the cadets' careless confidence. The creases in his face mapped a life of struggle, and his slight limp hinted at battles fought far from these polished halls. Yet, no one cared to notice. The cadets, consumed by their own ambitions, saw him as a relic, a man whose purpose was to clean up after their greatness. They didn't know his name, nor did they ask. They didn't wonder why he paused at the wall of honor, staring at a black and white photo of a young officer saluting amidst a sandstorm. That image, tucked among portraits of celebrated leaders, seemed to steady his breathing each time he looked at it. He'd linger for a moment, then move on, his silence a shield against their scorn. The academy's culture of excellence had little room for humility. Cadets strutted past him, their laughter echoing off the marble floors, while he emptied bins and scrubbed stains. Some nights, they left pranks like a fake application for senior custodial commander on his cart, listing skills as mopfu and advanced trash deployment. He folded it, pocketed it, and kept working. They thought he was broken, but he wasn't. The old man didn't need their approval. He'd earned something greater in places they'd never seen, places where survival was the only medal that mattered. While they slept, he remembered. While they mocked, he honored the ghosts of those who never came home. His quiet strength was a lesson they weren't ready to learn yet. The annual Symposium at Westbridge Military Training Academy was the event of the year, a showcase of discipline and ambition. Cadets spent weeks preparing, suits pressed, boots polished to a mirror shine, medals gleaming. The Grand Assembly Hall, reserved for dignitaries, buzzed with tension as the day approached. This wasn't just any symposium. A four-star general, Marcus Denning, was set to deliver the keynote. Known for leading elite missions across 4 continents, Denning was a legend, and his presence made the stakes even higher. The cadets, already brimming with arrogance, felt the pressure to prove themselves. Meanwhile, the old janitor continued his work, unnoticed as always. He moved slower that week, his eyes lingering longer on the wall of honor. The disrespect toward him intensified, as if the cadets' nerves found an outlet in cruelty. One night, someone left a crumpled note on his cart, a mocking caricature of him as General Broom. He picked it up, folded it, and kept sweeping. The cadets didn't see the weight he carried, the memories etched in his every step. They didn't know he'd once led men through chaos far greater than their petty pranks. To them, he was a punching bag, a man whose silence invited their scorn. The Academy's focus on prestige had blinded them to the humility that true leadership demands. Instructors, too busy with symposium preparations, turned a blind eye to the growing disrespect. The stage was set for a reckoning, though no one saw it coming. As the symposium loomed, the old man adjusted his faded retired cap and glanced toward the ceremony hall. Voices echoed from within, chairs being arranged, anticipation building. He knew something they didn't. Sometimes, the quietest figures hold the loudest truths. The morning of the symposium dawned with a palpable tension at Westbridge Military Training Academy. The Grand Assembly Hall was a hive of activity. Cadets stood in stiff rows, their uniforms impeccable, eyes wide with anticipation. Officers with clipboards and radios ensured every detail was perfect. This was no ordinary event. 4-star General Marcus Denning was about to speak. A man of towering presence, Denning had led elite missions across continents and mentored some of the military's finest. His reputation preceded him, and the cadets buzzed with nervous energy. Outside, the old janitor moved down the hallway with his cart, his steps slower than usual. His faded gray uniform and retired cap marked him as part of the background. He paused at the corridor's end, adjusting his cap, his gaze fixed on the ceremony hall where voices echoed. Inside, the room fell silent as the double doors swung open. General Denning entered, tall and commanding, his presence silencing the crowd. Salutes snapped in unison, cameras clicked, and he nodded once, his face unreadable. But instead of heading to the podium, he did the unexpected. He walked past the officers and cadets, straight toward the hallway. Every eye followed, conversations dying into stunned silence. He stopped before the janitor, looked him square in the eyes, and saluted, a full, formal salute. The room held its breath. Then, in a voice steady but soft, Denning spoke, "Sir, it's an honor to finally meet you in person." Gasps rippled through the back rows. "Sir," he called him. The janitor blinked, then returned the salute with quiet precision, a motion honed by years of survival. The cadets, once so sure of their superiority, were frozen. The general's respect for this janitor hinted at a story they'd never imagined, one that was about to unravel their world. The assembly hall at Westbridge Military Training Academy was frozen in disbelief. General Marcus Denning, a 4-star legend, had just saluted the old janitor, a man the cadets had mocked for months. The general turned to the room, his voice cutting through the silence. "Before I begin, I must recognize someone who shaped more lives than I ever could," he said. "A man who led soldiers into battle before many of you were born, whose leadership and sacrifice saved my life and 212 others during Operation Goliath." Murmurs erupted. Operation Goliath was a near-mythical mission, barely declassified, whispered about in military circles. Denning continued, "You know him as the janitor. I know him as Commander Elias Rower." The name hit like a grenade. Elias Rower, the janitor's last name was Rower. Cadets exchanged stunned glances. That name carried weight in classified briefings in military lore, tied to covert missions so secretive his career had been erased from public record. Some thought he was a legend, others, a ghost. But here he stood, in a faded gray uniform, holding a broom. Cadet Landon, who had spilled his tray days earlier, went pale, his arrogance replaced by dread.
Denning faced Elias again.
"Sir, I've waited years for this. You sacrificed more than anyone asked, and these cadets deserve to know who you are."
Elias nodded, not out of pride, but as if he'd always known the truth would surface.
The cadets sat in stunned silence, piecing together their cruelty, every joke, every prank, every moment they dismissed him. They'd called him Sergeant Mop, laughed at his limp, ignored his quiet dignity. Now, they realized they'd mocked a hero. The room, once filled with their laughter, now held a heavy stillness, waiting for Elias to speak. The assembly hall at Westbridge Military Training Academy was silent as Commander Elias Rower stepped forward. General Denning had just revealed his identity, a hero of Operation Goliath, a man who saved 212 lives, including the general's. The cadets, who once laughed at him, now watched with bated breath. Denning stepped aside, gesturing respectfully. "Would you share something with them, sir?" he asked. Elias hesitated, his eyes scanning the room, the cadets who judged him, the instructors who'd ignored their cruelty, the walls that had once excluded him from history. Then he spoke, his voice steady, needing no microphone. "I'll speak," he said, "not for me, but for those who never made it home." The room felt the weight of his words. Elias stood tall despite his age, his faded gray uniform a stark contrast to the polished cadets. "I've seen young men break under pressure," he began.
"I've seen leaders fall, not because they weren't strong, but because they lacked humility.
I came home not with pride, but with ghosts in my heart.
I didn't return to be honored.
I came here to stay close to what I loved, even if the world forgot me." His voice never wavered, each word a lesson carved from experience. He spoke of missions no one knew, of soldiers whose names were never recorded, of the price of leadership when the gunfire stopped but the memories lingered.
Cadets who once rolled their eyes now wiped tears. Instructors shifted uncomfortably, realizing their silence had enabled the disrespect. Elias didn't seek applause or glory.
He told the truth, the kind not found in drills or textbooks. His words were a mirror, reflecting the cadets' arrogance back at them. The room that once mocked him now listened, humbled by a man they'd underestimated. The assembly hall at Westbridge Military Training Academy was gripped by a heavy silence as Commander Elias Rower finished speaking. His words about humility, sacrifice, and the ghosts of fallen soldiers lingered in the air. The cadets, who had once mocked him as a mere janitor, now sat with their arrogance stripped away. Tears glistened in some eyes, others stared at the floor, guilt weighing on their shoulders. Even the instructors, who had turned a blind eye to the disrespect, shifted uncomfortably, aware of their own failures. Then, something unexpected happened. Cadet Landon, the same brash second year who had spilled his tray and mocked Elias with a smirk, stood up. His chest was tight with shame, his face pale. He looked directly at Elias, his voice trembling but firm. "Sir, I'm sorry," he said.
"I didn't know, but that's no excuse." The room held its breath.
Elias met his gaze and gave a small nod, nothing more, but it was enough.
Landon's apology broke the dam.
Another cadet stood, then another. One by one, every cadet rose to their feet. They didn't clap or cheer, they saluted. In complete silence, 200 future officers honored the man they'd once overlooked. Their salutes were a collective admission of their failure, a gesture of respect they'd denied him for too long. General Denning, who had introduced Elias, stood to the side, watching with quiet approval. He didn't interrupt, this moment belonged to the cadets and the commander they'd wronged. Elias stood still, his faded retired cap casting a shadow over his weathered face.
He didn't smile or speak. He didn't need to.
The room had finally seen him, not as a janitor, but as a hero whose silence had spoken louder than their laughter ever could. The assembly hall at Westbridge Military Training Academy remained silent as the cadets stood, saluting Commander Elias Rower. The man they'd once mocked as a janitor had just been revealed as a hero of Operation Goliath, a leader who saved 212 lives. His words about humility and sacrifice had pierced their arrogance, leaving them humbled. General Denning, who had introduced him, stood aside, letting the moment unfold.
Elias didn't bask in the recognition.
He didn't smile or acknowledge the salutes with fanfare. Instead, he turned slowly, his faded gray uniform creased from years of labor, and walked back down the corridor. His push broom, still leaning against his cart, waited for him like an old friend. He picked it up and disappeared around the corner, his steps as steady as ever, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The cadets remained standing, their salutes lingering even after he was gone. Some wiped tears. Others exchanged glances, piecing together every moment they dismissed him. The instructors, who had failed to intervene, now faced their own reckoning. The Hall of Honor, with its portraits of celebrated leaders, seemed incomplete without Elias's name. His quiet exit spoke louder than any speech could. He didn't need their applause, he'd earned something greater long ago, in battlefields they'd never see. The symposium continued, but the cadets were different. They listened to General Denning with new perspective, their arrogance replaced by reflection. Elias had taught them what the academy couldn't. Real leadership isn't about titles or glory, it's about carrying the weight of sacrifice with humility. As they filed out, they glanced at the Wall of Honor, wondering why his picture wasn't there. They'd never forget him now. It's 1:41 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time on Tuesday, May 27, 2025, and the story of Commander Elias Rower at Westbridge Military Training Academy continues to resonate. After that transformative symposium, the cadets left the hall changed. The man they'd mocked as a janitor had revealed a legacy of courage and sacrifice, reshaping their understanding of respect. General Marcus Denning's revelation that Elias had saved 212 lives during Operation Goliath had turned their world upside down. Elias, now back to his quiet routine, swept the halls as if the morning's events were a distant memory. But the academy was different. Cadets who once laughed now nodded respectfully when he passed. Some even paused to ask his name, though he offered little beyond a nod. The Wall of Honor still lacked his portrait, a silent oversight that gnawed at their conscience. In the days that followed, a movement began. Cadets petitioned to add Elias's name to the Academy's records, arguing his humility was the true foundation of leadership. Instructors, humbled by their inaction, supported the cause. The story spread beyond Westbridge, shared on social media and news outlets, sparking discussions about forgotten veterans. Elias remained unfazed by the attention. He continued his work, his faded retired cap a symbol of a life lived for others. One afternoon, a cadet left a small note on his cart, "Thank you, Commander." He read it, folded it, and tucked it away. His legacy wasn't in medals or speeches but in the lives he touched, those he saved and those he taught. The Academy learned that respect isn't a title or uniform, it's how you treat those who carry unseen burdens. As the sun set on Westbridge, Elias's quiet strength stood as a reminder. True heroes walk among us, often unnoticed, until the world is ready to listen.